Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live Q&A with Allan Smith, the only pipe fitter and plumber and Catholic defender that we have on our team, which is cool. So I'm Dominic, founder of Smart Catholics. Welcome, Al. Thanks for joining us today.
Dominic, thanks for having me. My wife always says I clean up good, and take off the scrubbies, the coveralls.
Nails. It's like,
I got like a little bit of paint still on my hand. I'm working on taking that off, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
Good. Well, we've got a lineup of some really intriguing questions, so we'll dig into those in just a second. And for those who are joining us, go ahead and you can drop your questions in the comments, and we will have a shot at answering them. So, Al, first of all, 30 seconds, 1 minute. What's your story? How did you get to where you are now?
Well, just started with being one of 12 children. Had a great start with my mom and dad. They filled the house full of love. Again, just you try to live with 12 children, 12 brothers and sisters. You learn how to survive.
So I hear you.
Yeah. So that was the great foundation. 12 children. My mother and father always got us busy in the church. Did everything. We had to sing. We had to serve. We had to read. So there was an engagement that our parents did not let us sit idle. No TV in the home, so we had to learn imagination. I'm the king of improv. My brothers and I, we always did improvisational comedy, so we know how to have a lively conversation without television. So, and that just continued in my life. I just, of course, found a love for the trades. Even though I have a business degree, fell in love with working with my hands and, of course, getting to meet a lot of people. And I chose a profession that every house has pipes. Every house is in need of a plumber. So I'm your guy. So I've been busy for 25 years in the trades. And every weekend I go into a radio station and do a Catholic hour. I've been doing that since 2006, so people know my voice. They don't always see my face, but they know my voice. And I just share the Rosary, Chaplet of Mercy. And for the last 8 years, I've been sharing Bishop Sheen on the radio on 3 radio stations here in Canada. So again, life is full, married with children, grandchildren. Of course, I'm blessed in that area. And again, I think it's just the whole idea of putting God first and good things happen. Good things happen.
Absolutely. And you're giving 3 talks at the online conference, and I think one of them went live yesterday already, and the second one went live. Pardon me. You have one tomorrow, Priest, Prophet, and King. Take your position at 9:00, and I think your other 2 have already gone live today. Is that right?
Yeah, the first one went live yesterday, and it was the talk of simply at the foot of the cross, where are all the men? And really, it's my 7 deadly sins talk. It was the talk I give at men's conferences to say, men, we're missing in action because we're too busy. We're just living in our life of sin. We feel unworthy. So let's kind of review the tapes. Let's go through what our Lord taught us from Calvary. Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen was a master at counseling men on sin and giving them a sense of recovery as possible, and use the 7 last words as the remedy for those 7 deadly sins. So it's a formula that has worked for me at men's conferences, and it's worked for so many souls. That book he wrote in 1939, Victory Over Vice, is a go-to book, and I recommend it often, not just for men, but for the ladies. We all have a sin problem. We're all trying to work it out. And Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen has the answer. So that talk went yesterday. Today, my talk is getting Mary right. Getting right with Mary and getting Mary right. So kind of a thought-provoking talk. And of course, tomorrow is Priest, Prophet, and King. Take your position. And as men, we have to take our positions.
I love that. It's a great focus. It's a great focus. All right. And for those who are just joining us, you can drop a comment, and we will work on answering those questions. So after every session, the video replays are immediately available. So it's like this lovely library that just keeps compounding with stuff you don't have to wait for. All right, let's dive in here, Al. Let's tackle our first question. We have a question from Jay, and I'll pop it up on screen. During Lent, Advent, and Holy Days, I feel strong in my faith, but it's during ordinary time I feel I seem to drift. I'd love to stay strong 365 days a year. How do I do that?
Good question. Good question. It's kind of like I always think of God's gym. We wake up January 1st. We all have a New Year's resolution. We say, this time is going to be different. I'm going to mend my life. And naturally, I think when you look at the liturgical year, as Catholics, we all sharpen up our game during Lent and Advent. The church reminds us, prayer, almsgiving, fasting. And, so you pay attention to your soul because you go, this is what we do. There's 2 seasons in the year where they ask us to, step up, get with the program. And then we go into ordinary time and we go, yeah, what's my program? And that's the problem. We don't have a program. We don't have a program. So I always say, plan to fail, fail to plan, or whatever that was. It's a great business axiom. It's if you don't have a plan and plan to fail. But I think you know what I'm trying to say here. So develop a plan. And so Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, he had 3, like I call 7-part plans. He was telling us you got to have a game plan. And sometimes it's just simple reminders that you have to have every day. You have to say to yourself, yeah, God came into the world to save me. Always remember that. Have joy in your heart. Yes, you have Jesus inside of you. Many of us who receive the Eucharist every Sunday forget that we carry Jesus with us.
Mm-hmm.
And 3, you can lose your soul, so work at it, be strong. And it's this idea of he just simply calls us to a daily prayer and to have a relationship with the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Mm-hmm.
In my talk, Get Mary Right, a lot of times what men forget and people in general is that God gives us a lot of divine help. And Mary is that, I want to say, protective custody. If we truly take her into our lives and ask her to coach us, because she formed our Lord. I always say, if you're struggling with how to be a Christian, go to Mary. She'll coach you. She trained Christ, and he spent 30 years with her. So spend some time with her. Talk to her during the day, and she'll guide you. Again, these are very things that sometimes they're right in front of us, right in front of us. But you have to wake up every morning and say, I got a plan. I got to work on this. Heaven is my true home. This is temporary. This is a camping trip for a lot of us. But you get down on your knees every morning and say, you're God, I'm not. Let's work on this together. But you have to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, if you don't have any goals, if you leave it to chance,
Yeah.
and that's what happens. We just leave it to chance. During Lent and Easter, there's a program.
Mm-hmm.
So things happen.
Yeah.
But during the rest of the years, the reason why we fail is we don't have a plan. So Archbishop Sheen has lots of plans. So lots of advice. I know some people read his daily meditations. There's lots of books he did that he wrote that are just simple daily guides to prayer. I've put together 2 books that are collections of his homilies and his writings. One thing that's beautiful about Sheen is he gives it in bite-sized pieces. You can just, listen to one of his talk for 15 minutes. You're set for the day. Read a passage from one of his books. You're set for the day. So it's manageable. It's manageable. So that's my advice. Have a plan. Have a plan. And Sheen can be your guide.
There you go. Pick a
Yeah.
program. There are plenty out there. I think I was just listening to Tim Staples the other day. He was quoting Thomas Aquinas, who was saying, if you're not growing in your spiritual life, you're dying, because we must always be growing. So at the very least, be reading something. A little thought maybe from me to Jay, like he says, during these great celebration times, I feel strong, and that's a good thing. And I think on the one hand, don't be afraid of enjoying the feeling. Sometimes God really rewards you with these wonderful, exciting feelings during these celebration times, and we shouldn't be afraid of them. But at the same time, we shouldn't also be afraid of ordinary time. We need to have the dry spells so that when the rains come, there's that celebration. But it's during that downtime that we then remember, sort of the feeling of fervor, or we remember what it's like when the whole community pulls together. But there has to be that time where we go away into our own little deserts, our own little back rooms, and close the door. And we need to be able to endure. I think it was in the Screwtape Letters, or someone who's one of these C.S. Lewis maybe, who was like, there's nothing more dangerous as far as the demons are concerned. There's nothing more dangerous than a man in the dark who has no reason to have faith, but has faith anyway.
Wow.
That is
So
the most powerful person or thing, in the world. Many of us, a lot of us, are in situations like that. I don't feel anything. I go to mass regularly. I feel nothing. Well, just hold on. One day at a time.
yeah, and Sheen has the answer to that. What I call that boredom. And sometimes we go to mass and you say, "I'm not getting anything out of this." And of course, if you ever read Sheen's book Calvary and the Mass, all of a sudden the Mass will come alive for you. So again, recommended reading. And to Jay, I say, you have to put some good content in your life. You need to say, what am I doing for spiritual reading? What am I doing? What am I putting into my ears to listen to? And, I don't want to give too many shameless plugs here, but years ago, I set up a little website called bishopsheentoday.com. Everything's free. I just searched the internet, found 100 YouTube videos, put them on there. Have 8 years of my audio broadcasts from my shows, put them on there. All the free books, downloadable books, put them on there. So if you want to have a good coach and you want Archbishop Sheen in your life, go to bishopsheentoday.com. It's all free. I love that word, free. I'm thrifty. Free's good. So there you go.
Perfect. All right, let's tackle our next question here. It's a bit of a long question, so not all of it will show up on screen, but I'll show some of it here. Jonathan says, I'd be interested in getting some perspectives on how to evangelize better, specifically with men in the workplace or in the parish community. What are some proven successes and how to engage men in deeper conversation? So it sounds like he's having a variety of conversations with people. Not all of them are coming to fruition, maybe because men are in different places or aren't yet receptive. And so, yeah, he's looking for those suggestions, maybe specifically with men in the parish community or in the workplace. What are some good ways to evangelize?
Right. Well, apologetics, and I think this is what this question is about, is saying, can you help me with a little bit of apologetics? I'm trying to interact with these men. I'm listening to them, and what I'm hearing coming out of their mouths isn't what I really wanted to hear. I have this desire to bring them closer to Christ and desire to have a true relationship with them, a meaningful relationship with them. And so again, how do I learn apologetics? And for me, it was Archbishop Sheen reading his books on the virtues, on the 7 deadly sins, on the 7 difficult people in the world, the intelligentsia, the moderns, the humanists, the sensationalists, those type of people. These were all things that I thought, I need a little bit of coaching. And what Sheen did so brilliantly was he would talk about everyday issues, just as we do when we meet our brothers at the water cooler on a Monday morning or at coffee during the break on the construction site. We have these conversations. But what Archbishop Sheen always did is he always kind of brought the scriptures in, and he'd say, I was watching the Emmy Awards last night, and I noticed a lot of the speakers didn't really thank God, and kind of reminds me of Christ when he healed the 10 lepers and how only one person came to thank him out of the 10. So he'd always kind of bring the life of Christ into the conversation, because I think most of us know these Bible stories. A lot of men don't really study their scriptures, but they know the good and popular stories. God so loved the world that he sent his only son. All of these ones. And so that's what he did. He just would always talk about worldly stuff, but always try to sneak the Lord in and what he experienced. And I think that was his key of bringing the conversation to Christ, that we remember him. And that's what the good thief said on the cross. Remember me, remember me. So again, I've learned so much by reading Archbishop Sheen, how to engage the culture, how to understand that this is how they think, and this is the response. So Archbishop Sheen gave me many of those responses in some of his small books. And I remember I put together in 2018 the book, The Cries of Jesus from the Cross. And it's Sheen's homilies, his reflections of coaching us along how to preach the Beatitudes, how to deal with those difficult people, how to respond to the know-it-alls. he has given me a tool in my tool pouch that has served me well in the construction sites and has engaged the culture. So I think that's what, to really answer that question, is that you got to sometimes go do your homework if you're wanting to do this and practice your lines. Again, I said earlier in my introduction, my brothers and I did improv all the time. So you got to practice sometimes. Role play. Is that the right? I don't know if I'm hitting the nail on the head here, but that's my answer. I'm sticking with it.
It's a good point, especially with like you say, role playing. It's one of the reasons why Thomas Aquinas is so intriguing, especially if you're just getting into him. His whole thing with every one of his objections that he raises is he tries to restate the other side's position half the time better than they do, to do them justice, and to always recognize or even grant the other side a sincerity that maybe they don't have. But let's just assume that you are. I'm going to assume you're absolutely sincere about what you're saying, and so if I understand correctly, here's what you're saying, and try to restate that. And half the time, to sort of come back to Jonathan's point here, like he asks, I don't want to feel like I'm wasting my time with certain people. There's that line in scripture where Christ is like, don't throw your pearls before swine, which is he's incredibly rough, advice. And what he's saying is, if somebody has no interest in engaging in dialogue, then don't do it. Don't push that. Just be open, be friends, be there, when they're ready. But if you are in a state of dialogue, then what's really important is to be able to demonstrate, I know where you're coming from and what you're saying, and not just always looking for answers. And this is my recommendation, and then leave it up to everybody else what they think, but it's more valuable to not even try to come back with answers every time. It's actually more valuable. Let's restate what you're saying. Let's try to clarify the words that you're using. And maybe we won't end this conversation with an answer, but what we will have done is clarify the journey towards that answer for both of us. And I'll demonstrate that I'm not against you. We're both on the same hunt for truth.
Yeah, and I think you spoke to something that's very important, especially in men's ministry, is that we have to take an interest in people. A lot of times as guys, we kind of have this alpha male thing that my opinion's it, baby. I don't want to hear your story. I don't want to hear your program. I don't want to hear what you read. I got to tell you what I believe to be true. And this is the problem with men. Men don't always do good together. Like, they're loners sometimes, But I think when you shoulder up to men and say, tell me what you're reading, give me your opinion, take an interest in them, then you'll be given that opportunity to say, I was been reading this book by Archbishop Sheen about virtue, and he's kind of got my attention, that I haven't been practicing the virtue, and I think that's what's wrong with society. Would you agree? And you pull them in, but you had to listen to their story first. You had to kind of say, I'm going to take an interest in you. Yeah. And that was the gift of Archbishop Sheen. He took an interest in people, and that opens the door.
Yeah, it's like that great line. If you want to be interesting, be interested. And that's one of the other things is always look for points of connection, and that's what friends are, people who have multiple points of connection between them. Like, we look at life the same way, we like the same kinds of stories, same kinds of movies, always be looking for those connections. And if you start to kind of get that sense that, your buddies at work or whatnot, like, oh, we're not connecting at this point, don't push it yet. I remember my dad's advice when I went to college the first time, because he was an apologist, and his advice, because I want to just, let's get out there, alpha male, let's apologize, get the apologetics going, let's argue, defend the faith and stuff. And he was like, no, just make friends. Just make friends. Don't argue. Don't do that. And it was the best advice I'd ever gotten, because I spent the whole time focusing on just making connections, meeting people where they're at, learning who they were, and not always walking into a situation like, I have the truth, which is a trap that I think, like you say, the alpha male we fall into is, we recognize, because we're Catholic, we have the truth, but we are not the truth. Christ is the truth. We may be wrong, even though we are, in the faith and have been given the incredible grace of perhaps being born Catholic or being accepted into the church. But how we're presenting it and how we have learned it may not be the best or for everyone. And that's where we need an incredible amount of humility and always be looking to create connections and create friendships, so that when we are able to then bring, those other points and those other discussions about truths of the faith and so on, we've created that environment where people are open.
Yeah. But the key is listening. I think of the scriptures, speak, Lord, your servant's listening. And some of the speakers have addressed this area that we don't listen enough. We don't listen to God, and sometimes we don't listen to our fellow man, because God works through them. And sometimes we are so proud, we always think, he can't teach me anything. No, if you just listened, you'd be amazed what could happen. So the art of listening, there's something to that. So we have to be good listeners.
I agree. That is a very solid point. Let's transition in our last 10 minutes here. We've got a question from Michael. And this is a fun one. I'm very interested in your response here. So he says, let me pull it up on the screen. In general, am I a man? Have I personally crossed the threshold between boyhood and manhood? Is there a rite of passage to becoming a man in the eyes of God and in the Catholic Church? That's a lot of fun stuff to unpack. We'll start there. And what do you think, Al?
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm surrounded by beautiful ladies in my life. I have 2 adult daughters. I have a lovely wife, and I ask them that question sometimes. When did I become a man? Um, I'm a little sometimes childlike. I'm almost 60 years old, and yet I still feel like I'm a boy. A lot of times, and by the way I carry myself, and sometimes Michael might be saying the same thing. Is that my age says I'm a man, and yes, as a confirmed Catholic, I'm a man. And so there's lots of things that say I'm a man. And again, these are labels sometimes that society puts on us. But deep down, we're always children. I think this is one thing that I try to say to people, like, don't beat yourself up too much here. Don't beat yourself up. Remember, you're a child of God. The scriptures affirm us in saying, hey, become childlike, or keep that childlikeness in some way. Yes, you have to be mature. Yes, there's those times of responsibility and seriousness that you need as a man. But don't beat yourself up on that. So the world will tell you when they think you're a man. But when God says that you're a man, I think a lot of times comes of how you treat women. And that's very important. I think it's one of these things Archbishop Sheen taught me, especially to say, a true man loves his mother dearly, and is willing to sacrifice for him. A true man is one that is not going to try to embarrass his mother. Sometimes when you're a child and you're immature, you make poor decisions. You embarrass your parents. You embarrass your mother especially. But as you grow mature and become a man, you lean more on the, the reservation, or you're reserved to say, I don't want to do anything that would offend my mother. But this passage, I really found good St. Joseph as a great example for me. I remember being newly married, and the formators at the marriage preparation conference said to the men, you got to go to St. Joseph. You've got to lean on him. You need to apprentice under him. He will teach you how to become a man. And how you're going to become a man is learning how to sacrifice for others, learning how to watch his Son, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who is true man. So the more that you can imitate him, the more manly you'll become. And many of our presenters talked about that. He is the model. He is the icon of manlyhood. And so we need to follow Christ. So that's practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect. And the more that we can die to self, the more we can follow Christ, the more I think people will say, now there's a man. Now there's a man.
I like that a lot. That focused on that living self-sacrifice that St. Joseph was a fantastic witness to. I'm curious to tackle or respond some of my thoughts here to that. And I think he raises a really valuable question, especially in, let's say, the First World West. We've lost that ritual that a lot of ancient cultures used to have, that define that moment, in, like, say, the American Indians, you would go out and spend 3 days until you had interacted with the Great White Spirit, and then you would come back and the tribe would welcome you as a man. Or, in the medieval cultures, it would be, some sort of a test, And there was an article series that came out on the Art of Manliness a couple of years back, and it was all about honor. What is honor? And it was so interesting to have it broken into a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. And honor is something we give each other. It's something that we recognize in each other. It's not something that you can get for yourself. It's something that is given to you. You have to earn it. And that's one of the reasons why men need community, because there's that instinctive need for validation. Have I made it? Am I, in the company of other mature men? And we need other men to give that to us. Now, that being said, the church herself doesn't have a ritual that way. And that might be a whole nother discussion, maybe why, but I think the reason why is that the church usually respects how a culture comes together, and it acts as the leavening agent, the salt, to clarify and help. But it lets the culture figure that out and doesn't create that for you. So there's this brilliant book I read, Wild at Heart. I think it was Jonathan Eldridge, about 10 years ago now, and he makes this amazing point where if you're looking for validation in other people constantly, you need to do some serious self-evaluation. And his recommendation was stop chasing after girls to find completeness. You need to go away and go to a hunting cabin, for a week. Find out who you are. You need to find out what you love, what you don't want out of life. Identify who you are. And then if you don't have that community that can give you that honor, that validation, right? Let's say you've lost the father in your life, or you just live far away from all your friends, or you've moved cities or something like that, and you don't have a community that you respect, that in turn respects you. You then have to kind of go do what St. Joseph does when he had to rush his family off to Egypt in the middle of the night and then try to find a living, for his family. I think our culture in the West says you are a man when you have reached these certain milestones. You're a certain age, you're making an income, you stand on your own 2 feet. Once you've made that, I think as our culture, then we sort of recognize you have reached, manhood. But I think half the time for a lot of us, sometimes that manhood comes a lot earlier when we turn around and realize I have learned to accept responsibility for myself and I take responsibility for others. Then it becomes a matter of maturity, which is something that just grows with sacrifice, with experience. And that's something we shy away from. And that's why this conference is wonderful, because it recognizes there's an interior immortal combat that will never die, where we must overcome ourselves.
Yes. And I thought of 3 things as you were sharing there, Dominic. I thought of how important it is for men to sometimes you have to earn it. And, I mentioned the question I asked my daughters and my wife, when did I become a man in your eyes? And they said, when you defended me. When you defended me. And my daughters mentioned a few times, you defended us here, here, and here. And my wife said, and there was a few times you defended me in public. And I really appreciated that. So when we can defend the defenseless, that's very manly. So I had to earn it through my actions. And another thing I say to people is you have to pray about it. Do you ever pray, Lord, help me to become a man, a true man? And it has to be one of our prayers. And the third thing is you have to become that soldier. I mean, when we look at soldiers, we say, now there's a man. He's fighting.
Yeah.
And the spiritual battle that we're in, if you wake up every day and say, I'm going to go into this spiritual battle for my family and for my soul, now that makes you a man. So again, you have to earn it. You have to pray about it. And of course, a lot of times you have to live it and become that soldier and put on your armor of God.
Beautiful. Thank you, Al. This actually concludes our Q&A. If you have any questions, and watching the replay from this, you can go ahead, drop them in the comments. I'm sure Al will check in throughout the day and maybe follow up and respond to folk. But if you haven't yet seen Al's talks, head on over to the conference website. That's going to be events.smartcatholics.com. You can log in if you've got your ticket. You can catch all the replays, and we have one last talk from Al tomorrow. And what is that talk again, Al?
Priest, prophet, and king. Take your position. And it's important because when we were baptized, we were anointed priest, prophet, and king. But the only problem is no one reminded us of that. Sometimes it's 20, 30 years before we hear, oh, I'm supposed to be priest, prophet, and king.
Yeah.
So take your position. So
perfect ending for our last question here. Thanks again, Al, for joining us, and thank you to everybody who was on the live call. And thanks to all the men for participating in this conference. We look forward to continuing to serve you.